And welcome to the next session where we're going to explore the Dhamma and dependent arising on paper 1, Buddhist beliefs. So the success criteria for this particular lesson is to be able to define the words Dharma and the concept of dependent arising. And with each of these two ideas, we need to make sure that we can explain 2 Buddhist beliefs about them, and also 2 ways in which beliefs about Dharma and dependent arising might influence Buddhists in the world today. We are also going to evaluate some statements relating to both the Dharma and dependent arising. So what is the Dharma? Dharma, as you can see from the title there, is often spelled in 2 different ways. That depends on the Pali or Sanskrit translation. You can learn either one, just recognize that both of these words are essentially the same thing, the Dharma. So today we're going to be learning about the Dharma, which is one of the most important ideas in Buddhism. When Buddhists talk about the Dharma, they're talking about everything the Buddha realized and taught after he became enlightened. So the Dharma is essentially the teachings of the Buddha that explain why suffering exists and how we overcome it. So very much part of the 4 Noble Truths, a core essential element of the Buddha's teachings, the Dharma. It's the truth about reality as how the Buddha discovered it. It's also everything the Buddha realized and shared, and a path to liberation from rebirth and suffering. It's a guide to living wisely, avoiding suffering, and being able to eventually reach enlightenment. So when Buddhists follow the Dharma, they are following the Buddha's understanding of life, suffering, and liberation, or freedom. There are 2 key Buddhist quotes here to help summarize this. The Buddha said in the Pali Canon, "What I teach is suffering and the cessation or end of suffering." This shows that everything in the Dharma is ultimately about dealing with dukkha, pain and suffering, and the liberation from this. Buddhists also say or chant in the Triratna, "I seek refuge in the Dhamma." If we remember that refuge means a sense of safety or comfort. So this means that they trust and rely on the truth of the Buddha's teaching to help guide their lives. So the Dharma is not just a theory, it's a practical living guide to how Buddhists behave, think, understand life, and try to reach enlightenment. So what does the Dharma consist of? The Dhamma is not just one teaching. It's a whole collection of ideas that together explain the nature of life and the way of overcoming suffering. It includes Buddhist teachings such as dependent arising, which we'll have a look at in a minute, that everything exists because of cause and consequence. It also consists of the 3 marks of existence. Anicca, that everything changes. Anatta, the idea of no fixed self or no soul. And dukkha, as we've already previously mentioned, that life involves suffering or unsatisfactoriness. Within the Dharma, contained within it, also falls the 4 Noble Truths. 1, the truth of suffering, that there is dukkha. 2, that the dukkha has a cause. The cause might be attachment, might be the 3 poisons, it might be the idea of craving or tanha. The 3rd Noble Truth being the end of suffering, the hope that it will one day reach an end. And the 4th being the Eightfold Path. It shows how to end suffering. The middle way, avoiding the extreme luxury and extreme self-punishment of the ascetic life, can fit within the Dharma. Mara and the 3 poisons, these are mental states that keep humans trapped within suffering, greed, hatred, ignorance. These are all things the Buddha taught, so therefore they're all part of the Dhamma. Karmic law and rebirth. Actions have consequences. They shape our future lives. The Buddha taught the 6 realms of rebirth: gods, demigods, humans, animals, hungry ghosts, and demons or hell beings. And all of this would be part of the Dhamma, the teaching of Buddha. And of course, ethical teachings, such as the 5 moral precepts. The first being refrain from harming a life, the last one being refrain from taking intoxicants. Other moral teachings such as karuna, compassion, and metta, loving kindness, ahimsa, non-violence. So all of these ethical teachings and ethical guidelines will also form part of the Dhamma. In Mahayana Buddhism, the Dharma also includes or extends to other really important elements or ideas. For example, sunyata, the idea of emptiness, that everything lacks fixed, independent existence, not just no soul, but no anything. And that's not a negative, that's seen more in a positive stance, which we'll have a look at in a future lesson. The Buddha nature. Everyone has the potential to become enlightened. That's something the Buddha taught. It is possible for all of us. The idea of Buddhahood, the goal of becoming fully enlightened. The idea of becoming a bodhisattva, the bodhisattva ideal. Becoming enlightened from the teachings of the Buddha to then remain in the cycle of life, death, and rebirth with the desire or intent of helping all other sentient beings achieve liberation. And then the 6 perfections. The 6 perfections of generosity, morality, patience, energy, meditation, and wisdom. All of these teachings together helps Buddhists understand reality, existence, and live in a way that leads to enlightenment. And now we'll move on to look specifically at what dependent arising is. We've got the idea here of paticca which is dependent arising. You will have to know both of those words, the Pali term, the ancient Pali term, or the English translation, dependent arising. And what essentially is it? It is the law of cause and effect. Everything in the universe exists because of something else. And that everything in the universe, because it exists, affects everything else. So the first bullet point there is showing that all things are interconnected. We could say all of humans are interconnected with each other. We're all living on the same planet. If the people in the past didn't exist, we wouldn't exist. The people in the future can't exist. Our moods and emotions change positively, neutral, negatively, based on our interactions with each other. We are at places of safety and peace and comfort because of each other. We're at states of war and conflict because of each other. It can extend to the animal kingdom, that we're interconnected with the animal kingdom. We have pets, for example, companions. Some animals, unfortunately, because of global warming, which we have exacerbated, are suffering, and therefore they depend on our help. Sanctuaries, for example. We've got parasites that live within humans that can't exist without living within us. And some of them are really healthy bacteria, for example, that lives within us. It can extend to the natural world. Look at how humans and animals might impact erosion, for example. It can extend to the human man-made world. Objects exist because we had an idea and we went into a design lab and created and wrote it all out and then manufactured it in a factory and etc. Everything exists because of something else. This is not just a human condition. This is the whole universe. So that extends even further to the spiritual world. So there is no God as creator, and there's no final day of judgment in Buddhism. There's this constant cyclical view of the world. Cyclical means we're in a cycle, the cycle of samsara. And karma has its consequences, positive and negative. So we can go up the cycle of samsara, if you like, and have a more positive rebirth based on our actions in our current life and in previous lives as well. We've gained merit, or we can gain demerit through unskillful action, and that could lead to negative karmic consequences. And we could have a more disadvantageous or unsatisfactory rebirth in future lives. So dependent arising is this idea that everything is interconnected, everything exists because of other things to exist, everything is all intertwined, and we're all needed to kind of like exist together in this cycle of life, death and rebirth. And there's an obvious link there to the 3 marks of existence. Well, all 3 of them really, but particularly I would say anicca, the idea that everything changes. Everything changes essentially because of dependent arising, this idea of law of cause and effect. But it can also link to anatta, the idea of no independent, stable self that doesn't change. My moods are constantly changing. My appetite is changing. My comfort levels are changing. Everything is constantly in this state of flux. And obviously, it would also link to dukkha, the third of the 3 marks of existence, because this change is what can either give us dukkha or alleviate our dukkha. When a country goes to war, a change, dukkha. When a country finds itself at peace, a change, dukkha is taken away. It can be simple little things, it can be massive things, it can be physical, it can be mental, it can be spiritual, etc. But this idea of everything is interconnected, everything exists because of other things. A good way of understanding this is a wave cannot exist without the ocean. So a wave on the sea wouldn't be able to exist if you didn't have an ocean in the first place. There's something that cannot exist without something else. The ocean wouldn't be able to exist without, and I could go on, but water couldn't exist without the chemicals that make water, hydrogen and oxygen. So if we didn't have hydrogen and oxygen, we wouldn't be able to have water. So you can bring this on a scientific level. You can bring it on a bakery, for example. If you're baking a cake and you haven't got the ingredients, the correct ingredients, you're not going to get the cake. So it's essentially, it's absolutely everything is linked with everything else. And there are 2 really, really good quotes that we could have a look here. The Buddha himself said, when this arises, that arises. He made similar statements such as, when this ceases, ends. That ceases, ends. This means that if one condition happens, another condition follows. And I think it's a quite nice, straightforward quote to learn if you get a dependent arising question, both taught by the Buddha, and it's found in the Pali Canon. The other important quote explains, he who sees dependent arising sees the Dhamma, and he who sees the Dhamma sees dependent arising. This means that if you understand dependent arising, you basically understand Buddhism. The Dhamma is Buddhism in its entirety. It's everything the Buddha taught. So just by understanding dependent arising and seeing the world through a worldview of dependent arising, this way you can understand what Buddhism is all about. So dependent arising closely links, as we said, with the 3 marks of existence. And a clear visual example of this is found in the Tibetan Wheel of Life, which I've pictured here on this slide. It shows samsara, the cycle of birth, death and rebirth, obviously part of dependent arising, this law of cause and effect based on karma, the outer circle. Sorry, not the middle circle, but the little bit around that shows karma leading to positive and negative states. Around that, you've got the 6 different realms of rebirth, whether that's gods, demigods, humans, animals, hungry ghosts, and demons. On the outer cycle, you've got the 12 nadanas, which are all about cause and effects, such as old age, such as sickness, such as birth, such as death. So all these different things, these stages, these movements, these leaps that we find in life as well. So dependent arising explains how everything in life is connected and constantly influenced by causes, including our thoughts, our actions, behaviours, etc. So the influences of the Dhamma and dependent arising on Buddhists today. So belief in the Dharma and dependent arising deeply influences Buddhists in how they view the world, what actions they get up to in the world today, whether it be moral or whether it be religious. An example is it guides their ethical behaviour. Because everything the Buddha taught is found within the Dharma, they will try to make sure they follow them guidelines. For example, the 5 moral precepts. They'll try to avoid harmful actions because they believe these actions have negative consequences because of dependent arising through the law of karma. They also hope that dukkha can be reduced. Since suffering has causes, it will also have ends. And that's the nice thing about dependent arising. Yes, wonderful things disappear. Yes, things go that we're attached to. Yes, we get suffering. It comes on, but it also goes. Knowing dependent arising can make you go, do you know what? I'm a bit ill at the moment, but this ill will die down. This illness will ease at some point. This emotion that I'm experiencing now of jealousy, of hatred, of anger is going to disappear, and I'm going to feel excitement and happiness again. The teachings on mindfulness and meditation encourage a calmer mind. Buddhists train their minds to understand their thoughts, their emotions, tanha, their cravings. It can also encourage wisdom or the development of wisdom. To understand dependent arising helps Buddhists make sense of why things happen. It provides meaning and spiritual purpose. It shows life isn't random. This isn't based on luck. This is a set plan based on our previous positive or negative karma and the positive and negative karma of other sentient beings around us. And there is a path to enlightenment and freedom from the suffering. It supports chanting and worship. Many chants repeat elements of the Dhamma, such as we said earlier, the Triratna chant. I pay refuge to the Dhamma. I seek refuge to the Dhamma. It helps them understand the whole of Buddhism. Dependent arising acts like a key that connects many other teachings together. It encourages compassion. If everything is connected, then harming others eventually harms yourself. That idea of karuna and the idea of loving kindness or metta. It promotes responsibility. Buddhists feel responsible for the side effects of their actions, and it shapes attitudes to life. They may become calmer, less selfish, more aware of their impact on others. So the Dhamma isn't just something Buddhists learn. It shapes how they think, behave, and live. So I've got a few questions on the next slide. So the first one, what does the term Dhamma most accurately refer to in Buddhism? Select your answer. And the answer here is, of course, the teachings of Buddha. The next question, dependent arising teaches that things arise Because of what? Is it luck and chance, punishment from the gods, a fixed destiny, or conditions and causes? Select your answer, and the answer is, of course, D, conditions and causes. Give one teaching found in the Dhamma. Pause the video now, write out one teaching that's found in the Dhamma, and see if you are correct. Okay, so the answer to this is literally anything within Buddhism, because the Dhamma is the teachings of the Buddha. So there's a long list on the slide there that you could have chosen, including dependent arising. However, anything that we have learnt about in Buddhism over the years would also be acceptable as long as it's something the Buddha taught. Okay, so this question, a 4-mark question, it's an influences question. Explain 2 ways belief in the Dhamma influences Buddhists today. And a quick reminder, you need 2 different beliefs, just like you would in a normal question. 2 beliefs about the Dhamma, but at the same time, you need to say, this makes Buddhists, and say something it makes Buddhists think or do. Pause the video, write an answer, and then I'll share a waggle with you. Okay, so we have this example of an answer here. So the 2 beliefs are the bits before the highlighted part. So the first one, the Dhamma includes all the teachings from the Buddha that he realized at his enlightenment. There's a belief about the Dhamma. Another belief, the Dhamma is one of the 3 refuges that give Buddhists a sense of safety and comfort. That's 2 examples of what the Dhamma is. Of course, you could have talked about dependent arising and interconnectedness. Of course, you could have talked about the 3 marks of existence, or the 4 noble truths, or the ethical guidelines. There's many different ways you could have answered this question. However, what you must do on this type of question is say, this makes Buddhists, and then say something that a Buddhist would think or do in the world today. So the first one, that the Buddha realized the Dhamma at his enlightenment, this makes Buddhists want to increase their wisdom in the Dhamma by reading the Pali Canon so they too can become enlightened. Or the Dhamma is one of the 3 refuges that give Buddhists a sense of safety and comfort. This makes Buddhists chant the Triratna so they can cultivate a sense of comfort. So that chant, I pay refuge to the Buddha, I pay refuge to the Dhamma, I pay refuge to the Sangha, is chanted so they too can get a sense of safety in their worship. Okay, here's a 6 marker. Explain 2 Buddhist teachings on dependent arising. Refer to sacred writing or another source of Buddhist belief and teaching. Pause the video now and have a go at this question. Okay, and a waggle for this one. I've written on the slide here. This is the first part of the waggle. This would get you 4 marks. It's the different colours show different marks. The black writing to begin with, that is the simple belief about the dependent arising. Then the light blue is the explanation of that belief. Then we need a source. Remember, the source is more important than the quote. The source is highlighted in yellow and the quote is written in purple. And then we need to apply it back to that particular question. So dependent arising shows that everything is not independent by dependent. Sorry, that's supposed to say but. Dependent arising shows that everything is not independent, but dependent on other things for its existence. This teaches Buddhists that their actions have consequences on themselves and on others. The Pali Canon states, when this arises, that arises. This shows that all things that we do in this life create a positive or negative karma that we experience in future lives. But of course, it's 6 marks. We need another explained point. Remember, we don't need to give a source or a quote here. Dependent arising is believed to sum up the Buddha's teachings. There's a point. As the Buddha said, those who see dependent arising see the Buddha. So I have used a quote in this one. It's not essential to, but I've just explained that teaching from the Buddha, that it sums up the whole of the Dhamma. So finally, here's two examples of evaluation statements. Really good idea here to pause the video and think of these two statements and why people might agree or disagree with them. The first one, dependent arising, sums up the whole of Buddha's teachings. So some arguments that would say yes it does. Well, we've got that quote that we've just had a look at. He who sees the Dhamma sees dependent arising. He who sees dependent arising sees the Dhamma. That quote is perfect for a question like that. Dependent arising also shows how suffering arises. And the whole point of Buddhism is about alleviating suffering. It links directly, therefore, to the Four Noble Truths. It links directly to the spiritual journey towards liberation. I've kept talking a lot today about positive and negative karma. A lot of Buddhists say the Tibetan wheel of life. That image sums up all of the Buddha's teachings. Well, basically that image of life, the wheel of life, the Tibetan wheel of life, is essentially dependent arising. It explains the three marks of existence, particularly anicca, the idea that everything is in constant change. It is so essential to Buddhist philosophy. It shows how craving, tanha, leads to suffering. They meditate on this particular teaching, dependent arising. Many Buddhists would sit there and meditate for hours on end, considering and thinking solely about dependent arising. It's used in chants. The Triratna chant, I pay refuge to the Dhamma, for example. So it's essentially part of the Buddha's teachings there. It connects everything in Buddhism together. It shows that idea that we're all in it together, this idea of interconnectedness. It's a way of seeing the world. It's a particular world view. It explains how enlightenment is impossible. There's many arguments that you can give to support that, but what about against? Why doesn't dependent arising sum up the whole of Buddha's teachings? Well, some would say Buddhism is far more about just being good. It's not really a religion of the book. It's not really a religion of teachings and dogma and high concepts. It's more about doing the right thing in life. So you could say that karuna and metta sum up the whole of what the Buddha taught. You could say the 5 moral precepts, guidelines on how you should live your life and relate to others, is the most important part of the Dhamma. You could say meditation. You know, when you think of Buddhism, a lot of people go straight to meditation and mindfulness. That is a core Buddhist practice. So potentially that is what sums up Buddhism. It is essentially how the Buddha achieved enlightenment underneath the Bodhi tree. The Four Noble Truths. You know, I think most people, when they think of a Buddhist teaching that know something about Buddhism, they would go straight to the Four Noble Truths. It's the whole point of the Four Noble Truths is the idea that suffering exists. What is the cause of suffering? Oh, suffering can end. How do we end suffering? Following the Eightfold Path. Maybe that is more central, or the middle way, for example. Mahayana Buddhists might focus on other teachings like sunyata. Community might be more important. So the idea of community coming together, the sangha, the chanting, the puja that is performed in the temples. You could say essentially nirvana, the ultimate liberation from the cycle of life, death and rebirth. That should be the sum of what Buddhism is all about. You could say that for ordinary Buddhists, Buddhism is different to monastic Buddhists like monks and nuns. So for lay Buddhists or ordinary Buddhists, moral practices might feel more important, yet for monks and nuns, maybe concepts such as dependent arising are more important. Some Buddhists focus more on devotion in worship rather than this highfalutin philosophy. Okay, so statement 2, the Dhamma is the most important refuge for Buddhists. Again, a lot of what we've just said there can be brought in, written specifically to this question, but a lot of the same points. So why is the Dharma the most important refuge? So first of all, how I would attack this question is I go, right, arguments for everything in the Dharma that's really important. Well, we know that the Dharma is everything the Buddha taught. So anything the Buddha taught that is really important. Fantastic. Loads to say about that. You could talk about the Four Noble Truths, you could talk about Mara, you could talk about karma, you could talk about the guidelines, ethics, metta, karuna, ahimsa. You could talk about 3 marks of existence. There's so much you could say on that side. How would you argue against? Well, what are the other refuges? You've got the Buddha himself. So anything about the Buddha story, maybe the Buddha as a role model. You could maybe talk about the Buddha's birth, the Buddha's life of luxury, his renunciation, his witnessing of the 4 sights. You could talk about the Buddha's ascetic life, and renouncing the ascetic life as well. Or you could talk about the Sangha, the idea of Buddhists coming together, supporting each other, the community of both lay and monastic Buddhists working together. You could talk about puja, worship, rituals, retreats, etc. So there's many things you could do there. So let's have a look. Some arguments for, we've got it's the truth. Remember, Dhamma is the truth, it's the truth, and that guides their life and helps them understand reality. It shows them the path out of suffering. Without the Dhamma, Buddhism would not even exist. It helps gain wisdom and understanding. And remember that wisdom is one of the qualities of a bodhisattva. It gives meaning and purpose to a Buddhist life in the world today. It helps explain absolute myriad of different concepts in Buddhism, such as karma and rebirth and enlightenment. Buddhists rely on the Dhamma for ethical support in their life, for ethical decision making. It connects past, present, and future practices, so it helps with their idea of tradition in the religion. It's part of the 3 refuge chanted daily. This one you could probably argue that all 3 of them are equal. The 3 refuges, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, are equally important for a Buddhist. They all provide a place of safety and comfort. Buddhists believe that the Dharma is timeless and it's relevant in all different times and cultures. Arguments against, some may see the Buddha himself as more important, others might view the Sangha as more important. You could say, without the Buddha, the Dharma couldn't exist in the first place. Or without the Sangha, the Dharma wouldn't be preserved. We wouldn't have it today if we didn't have a worldwide Buddhist community today. Many Buddhists rely emotionally on the community rather than a holy book, for example. Meditation practice might feel more important spiritually to them than the Dharma. So there's many arguments there that you could use to argue for and against those. And in a later video, we'll show you some examples of how to answer 12-mark questions. Thank you for listening today.